Okay, Jenny, talking about what you could see, even though you're totally blind. Would that be correct to say?
Yeah, so I am totally blind. I can't even see light or dark. But with my right eye, which I've been totally blind in since about 4 years ago, I can see different colours, and it's like seeing through tissue paper. It's opaque but see-through at the same time, although obviously I can't see through it. And the colours change at different times.
Do you think it depends on the light around you? If you're in a brightly lit area, or?
No, it's not consistent at all. And it's still there whether my eye is closed or open. And if I put my hand in front of my eye, if I completely cover my eye with my hand, it's still the same. It doesn't change at all.
That's really interesting. I don't think that's what most people would expect.
Yeah, and with my other eye, which I've been totally blind in since 17 and didn't really use much before that, I can't see anything at all. So it's not black, because obviously I've had some sight. I know what black is, and it's not black. It's just nothing.
I think that would be quite hard to imagine for somebody who's used to being able to see something. It's not a concept of not seeing anything.
Yeah.
It's quite difficult to understand.
Yeah.
So you were talking. You mentioned that when you were younger, you could see more. So how has your sight changed over time?
Yeah, very.
I realise it's quite a long story, but
yeah, it's a
kind
very
of
long
summarise the highlights.
Okay, so when I was very young, so pre-7, my better eye was my left eye, and so the vision in that was about, I can't remember now, but it was quite, I was equivalent to partially sighted in my left eye, so I had quite a lot of useful vision in my left eye, and I could read quite small print. And see quite well in distance-wise. And then at 7, I had a cataract operation, and due to glaucoma complications, lost quite a lot of sight in that eye. So I had to move over to using my right eye full-time. Then at 17, I lost the sight completely in my left eye due to retinal detachment. And then, so again, I was using my right eye full time then. And my right eye always been registered blind in my right eye. And up until 4 years ago, I had quite a lot of, not quite useful sight, but colour and large details like buildings and things I could work out, and large print on the computer. But then 4 years ago, I had a retinal detachment in my right eye, and I can now see nothing at all. So no light perception at all.
Okay. Shall I say a little bit about
yeah, sure.
myself as well? Please feel free to ask me questions as well as me asking you questions. But like you, I have lost the sight when I was younger, and I was classified as partially sighted, but I was kind of at the better end of the scale, so I could still see quite a lot, and I could, when I was at primary school, I could read books without any sort of magnifying glasses or anything like that. I just wore spectacles, but I did struggle with sort of reading the blackboard and seeing some things at distances and so on. And my sight stayed pretty stable throughout my teenage years and when I went to university. But in my last year at university, I started to notice that I I was finding it harder. I couldn't see the blackboard, so I would copy notes from my boyfriend who was doing the same course and sat next to me. And I would copy the notes. He would copy the notes from the board, and then I would copy out of his book into my book. And this had always been quite successful throughout school and so on. But I started to find it more and more difficult. And then I noticed a kind of strange double vision phenomenon. And that was the start of an indication that my cornea was starting to become opaque, as it can do with Aniridia. And at that point in time, there wasn't really much that needed to be done about it. And so it just gradually deteriorated. But when I got to when I was about 30 or 31, I noticed a more significant drop in the sight in my left eye. But I didn't really realize how bad it had got until one day, for some reason, as I got off the tram, I decided, I wonder what will happen if I close my right eye and I just look out of my left eye. And I got a massive shock because suddenly everything was a lot less clear. And then I kind of realized that actually the sight in my left eye had really deteriorated. And then my right eye started to follow the same pattern. And then a couple of years after that, so about 3 years ago now, I became registered blind. But in fact, I can still see quite a lot in terms of I still have useful vision and I can still read, print and so on. But now I have to have everything magnified a lot. And it's definitely different from how it was before, but I can still use my vision.
Yeah, and I was saying to you just before that your pictures that you put up on Facebook, the descriptions you gave sounded like what my vision was like when I was a teenager in my early 20s. So it sounded like, the colours descriptions you used for like the people and the buildings were described probably what I could see when I was a lot younger, so like I said, teenage years.
And I think for me, now I do rely on the colour of things quite a lot to distinguish what they are, whereas perhaps in the past I could have seen more detail. Now I'm just guessing, basically, educated guessing based on the colour of things.
On the colours, yeah. My colour vision was really important to me, and I remember I didn't like wearing sunglasses because the sunglasses blotted out the colour vision for me. So I relied so heavily on colour vision that I couldn't wear sunglasses because it changed all the colours.
Yes, I definitely agree with that. I remember when I was very young, or maybe like 4, I used to have some brown tinted sunglasses, and I remember wearing them outdoors and looking at some plants in the garden which had some bright pink flowers on, and I kind of realised that when I took the glasses off, the pink was much brighter and the green was much brighter, and I thought, well, that looks nice. So I think after that point, I decided that I didn't want to wear those glasses anymore. And I didn't wear sunglasses for a long time, but I wasn't all that bothered about the sun until I started having these problems with my cornea.
Yeah.
And since then, I've definitely had to wear sunglasses, but I'm very choosy about the colour of the lenses, and I prefer a sort of grey colour because it doesn't tend to interfere with the actual colours. It just sort of damps down the brightness.
Yeah, because I find like contrast is really important, like the path and the grass. When I could see that was when I was navigating, it was quite important that I could see the contrast between the path and the grass and walls and building lines and the pavement or whatever.
So now that you can't see at all, how have you adjusted to not having all that information anymore?
I found it really, really difficult. I thought naively, when I lost my vision, I'm going to be all right because I've got a guide dog already. That was my first thought when my vision went, well, I'm okay, I've got a guide dog. I know how to use my guide dog. And that was a very, very naive thought because my guide dog wasn't used to me not having any sight. She was used to me having some sight and not helping her out as such, but it's like a joint partnership, a working together. And because I wasn't doing my bit, she had to take on more strain and more of the partnership, and that put stress on her, and she had to retire because she couldn't cope with it, and it made her ill. So then I was a bit stuck because all my routes that I know around my home area and at work, for example, I learnt with my guide dog. So I had to learn everything from scratch using a long cane, and I can't walk in open spaces because I veer. I can't walk in a straight line because when you've got some vision, you've got something to fix your gaze on. Even if you've got hardly any vision, you've got to that's again going back to colour vision. I when I had some vision, I could fix my sight on a building or a tree or something in the distance or something and aim towards that. And now I haven't got that point of reference to walk towards. I veer diagonally instead of going in a straight line. So when I use my cane, I have to stick to the shoreline, and of course there isn't always a shoreline to follow. So I found it really, really, a shoreline is like a building line, for example, or the curb edge. So I found it really difficult to learn routes with my cane. It took me 4 months to learn the route to the local supermarket, which is about between a 5 and 10 minute walk away. It took me 4 months to learn that route again. And 8 months after losing my vision, I got a new guide dog, and that changed my life because she just really helped me get my life back on track. But even with her, my mobility is still really, really limited. I can only do 4 routes with her at the moment, and I've had her 3.5 years, which is very limited to what I used to be able to do. So that was really long.
No, it's all really good information. So, well, I guess I can say my own struggle with mobility aids. I hadn't really used a white cane in the past. I remember being at primary school and being taken out of class one day by the local, I think she was like a teacher for the visually impaired, but she took me out of class and took me to the village green, which it's like a big circular grass area with a road going around the edge. And she put this symbol cane in my hand, and then she said, you can use this to cross the road. But it seemed rather silly because there was no traffic. It was the middle of the day, and it was quite a quiet village at that time of day. So we had to wait about 10 minutes for a car to come along so that I could try out holding the cane and the car stopping to let me across the road. So from that experience, I didn't really see the point in having one, certainly at that age where I could see quite well, and I was generally either in places that I knew or I was with my parents or whatever. I did eventually get a symbol cane when I think when I went to university, because I did like the idea that sometimes people would know that I was visually impaired just by holding it, so I didn't have to explain. But to be honest, the times that I had used it, I didn't always get the reaction that I expected. I think sometimes people just didn't notice. But I eventually realised when I was on a trip with work, I was staying in a hotel, but it didn't have a restaurant. We had to go next door to the pub, and it was dark, wet night, and I had to cross the hotel car park and then find a path to the pub. And the path to the pub was made of paving stones, and they were all different sizes, and they were wet. They were reflecting the light from some lights that were kind of on little bollards, so they were kind of at waist height. And,
oh yeah, I know the kind. Yeah.
And I suddenly realised it was really confusing. I could see just light was bouncing off this wet surface, which confused me and kind of dazzled me. And I wasn't sure if these were flat paving stones or if there were steps. And that made me realise it would probably be a good idea to get a long cane. So that's, a proper white cane that touches the ground, which you can use to detect obstacles and so on. And so I did go ahead and I got one, and I got some training from the habilitation officer at the local social services. But I have to admit, I don't use it very often. I carry it around with me just in case, but I feel a little self-conscious about getting it out, but that's partly because I don't use it all the time. I don't like carrying around in my hand all the time because I like having the hands free, but then I think people might think I'm a bit strange or I'm faking it if I suddenly get the cane out of my bag and unfold it.
And a long cane's quite chunky as well, isn't it? To put in your bag.
It is quite chunky.
Yeah.
It doesn't fit easily into a bag. I have started. I always had quite large handbags because I like carrying large amounts of stuff around with me, just in case I need things. So I guess the long cane fits into that. Carrying it around just in case. But I do find it useful for stopping buses. I think it's more chunkier, so it's more easy for bus drivers and things like that to see. And I think from the reactions I've got when I have used it, I think people understand what it is better than a simple cane.
Have you looked at a guide cane?
Yeah, I've thought about getting one of those, but they're possibly less well known than the other types of cane. I felt when I sort of talked to other visually impaired people about it. I didn't find many people who used one.
I went from using a symbol cane, hardly ever, to needing a guide cane, so just a bit of more input for like steps and things, like you were saying, of checking the surface area and stuff, when I was going to college and things. And that was useful because I didn't need a long cane. I didn't need it full time, but I needed a bit more than the symbol cane, so I used a guide cane.
And how did you notice like a difference in the way people reacted to you? Either
not really.
Or...
No, it was like a symbol cane, really, the same as a symbol cane.
And when you've used a long cane or a guide dog, does that change how people interact with you?
The guide dog, definitely, because it's like a magnet. Although sometimes you are still invisible sometimes, even with a guide dog, which is quite funny. But it's like a social magnet. It's a good opening for conversations and things, and people tend to offer you more help with a guide dog than a cane, I would say, definitely.
I've kind of struggled a little bit with if I do get on the bus with my cane, I notice that lots of people not every time, but quite often people offer me their seat, but sometimes I can see that it's actually quite an old person. Like I see they've got grey hair. I think I even saw they had some kind of walking stick or something, and I'm like, no, I'm fine. I'm okay standing up as long as I'm holding on to something. So I didn't feel like they might need the seat more than I did, but they were often very insistent. So then I feel like I have to take it just to not be rude.
Yeah, it's often the old people that offer you seats, I find, as well, actually. And you think, well, like you say, you think, actually, you probably need it more than I do.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, hi.
Yes.
Hello. Sorry, I was a bit late into the conversation.
Ah,
I'm sort of at a stage where it's a little bit before where Katie is, I'd say, because when I was younger, my parents didn't really, I think it was offered for me to have mobility training with a cane, and they said no, because they thought it'd make me look vulnerable, especially like in a mainstream school. So I didn't have that, and I was taught to sort of just manage, and so that's just what I do. And I have moments sort of more often now where I think I could really do with something, but it's not all the time. And so in those moments, I think, right, I really need to get these things sorted out. And then the moments where I have the opportunity to do it, I think actually I don't really need that. So it's really difficult for me to get to a stage where I need, where I can get that mobility training and get a long cane or whatever. And I think I'd probably be like Katie, have it in my handbag, but at least I would have it for those moments, like, when you're in that car park in the middle of the night and you need to get somewhere. But yeah, I haven't quite managed to get myself to that stage of actually accessing that help. And I find that's quite a big barrier mentally to get over.
Definitely. I was forced to use a long cane, actually, because I went to residential college at the age of 20, I think. I went away to residential college, and they were showing us around on the first day. And there was the outside of one of the buildings was separated by a raised flower bed, and they were showing me from one door to the other door of the building, and I used my foot to trail around the flower bed, and they shouted at me and said, "Where's your long cane? You obviously need your long cane. Where is it? Don't use your foot, use your cane." I said, "I haven't got one." And they said, "Don't be silly, you must have a long cane because you need one." I said, "No, I haven't." So they basically went away and brought me back a cane and went, "Use this." And so that was my introduction to using a long cane. And then they actually did give me a few lessons on how to use it. But then I used a long cane from then on full time, actually, interestingly. So, yeah, I don't know if they hadn't done that, I don't know when I would have transitioned to using a long cane.
Do you think that's maybe a difference between maybe going to a mainstream school and going to, like a specialist college?
I don't know. I went to a specialist school, but they never thought I had enough vision loss to need a long cane as such at a special school. I always had a symbol cane when I did mobility at school, at a specialist school.
And I think it was offered, but we just never took it up at a mainstream school. So it was there, but yeah.
Well, it was never really offered to me apart from this one occasion at primary school, but I don't think it was fully explained to me what it was about, really. Otherwise, I might have had a different opinion. And I only actually got a symbol cane after meeting other people with Aniridia, who then said to me, "Oh, don't you have a symbol cane?" or "This is what it's for, and this is why it might be useful." Then I understood better what the purpose of it was, or hearing it from other people who had used one and found it helpful in certain situations helped sort of encourage me a bit to at least get one and have it there if I needed it. And probably maybe the same is true for the long cane in that actually having met other people with aniridia and other people who are just visually impaired in general allowed me to understand the purpose of that better as well. And again, perhaps I would have been less. I'm still trying to get through the mental barrier, as Hannah described it, but I probably would be struggling with it more, I think, if I didn't know other people who used them.
Yeah, I thought when I lost my sight that I was quite pleased that I'd learned how to use the long cane before I'd lost my sight, because then it was sort of not as easy, but easy is the wrong word, but it was sort of, I knew what it was rather than having to learn something as well as coping with total vision loss. I already knew a few of the techniques, how to use the cane, which was good.
That was something that also went through my mind, is I didn't want to be in to get to a position where I couldn't do the things that I had done before, and I was having to perhaps wait to get some help. I thought, well, at least if I understand how to use one, I can do a little bit more to help myself, or I could at least maybe go out in places I was familiar with a little bit more confidence. And I'm also very glad that I learned how to touch type when I was at primary school. I thought it was a neat skill to have that other people didn't have, but I didn't really think about it in terms of my eyesight. But now that it's much harder for me to, well, I can see the computer screen, but it has to be magnified quite a lot, and I certainly can't cheat and look down at the keyboard and see the letters anymore. So knowing where they all are by sort of memory, muscle memory, is definitely a bonus.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that as well. And I actually learnt Braille as well, and I'm very thankful that I learnt Braille at a young age. Although I was stopped from learning Braille at a very young age, but then relearnt when I lost a little bit of vision when I was 14. Started learning again, and I'm really thankful that I actually learnt Braille when I was allowed to, because, well, especially now, because I'm a Braille teacher for those that don't know. So I actually, it's very important now, because I wouldn't have a job if I didn't know Braille.
I think that for me as well, my vision varies quite a lot at the moment, because if I use a contact lens, but if I have a cornea scratch or something, then I can't wear it for a while, and so my vision is a lot poorer. But going in terms of work, it has very little effect, because I have Zoom text with a screen reader, and I'll just whack up the Zoom text to that more magnified, and get the screen reader to read more to me, and I can carry on doing whatever I need to do. So it means that I can carry on even when things are more difficult in terms of my
I've definitely used that as well. I started out with just I used to just change the settings on the computer to make the screen resolution lower, and that kind of made everything a little bit bigger. And then I started using Zoom text, and then in recent years, the magnification's gone up and up, and I started sometimes using the screen reading function for long documents. But I do wish I had been offered the option of Braille as a child. I don't know if I would have taken it, because I might have thought that my sight wasn't bad enough then, so I might not have opted for it. But it would have been nice to have been offered, because I do find now I really enjoy audiobooks, and I've always enjoyed audiobooks. I always love reading, and I used to get lots of books at the library, and then I discovered that I could also get the audiobooks for free because I was partially sighted. So that just gave me some extra books to read, but essentially, because I always went through them really quick. And now I still enjoy audiobooks, and I listen to a lot of fiction in audiobook form. But I do find with more factual things, because I studied physics at university, and I now work for an engineering firm. So I'm sort of reading a lot of like technical documents, and I find, although the computer technology allows you to often to have those read out loud, I do find they're quite boring trying to listen to them and trying to concentrate and keep my attention focused. And so I have always wondered if using Braille, like a Braille display on the computer, so that I don't know if sort of feeling the Braille would be more of a similar experience to seeing the text than listening to the text, as you know, I don't know if that would sort of help it sink in, or
I'm a visual learner. It sounds like you're a visual learner.
I think I might.
I'm a visual learner as well. I think that's probably because of the auditory processing issues, isn't
Definitely, yeah. I can't use like a screen reader like JAWS, so when I lost the ability to use magnification, I was really stuck because I can't solely rely on speech software, although saying that I can on my phone. On VoiceOver is fine, but actually on the computer, JAWS or NVDA, I can't listen to. I actually physically have to have something in front of me. So that's why Braille is really important to me, because I can actually read it in front of me.
Yeah.
And like you say, the auditory processing, I struggle so badly with background noise and things like that. And it's a lot better if you can physically actually read it.
I think I find that as I'll read with long documents with a screen reader, but I'll have to be able to see the words so that I can follow it through. Otherwise, I just won't be able to keep focus on it.
Definitely, that's why, like I said, when I lost magnification, the ability to see magnification, I really struggled.
And at work, they sort of suggested that I try and use JAWS alongside magnification, but I find that I prefer to be able to see it, even if I have to put the magnification up really high. I much prefer to do it that way than to have the computer talking to me all the time. It just gets annoying.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I do have a copy of JAWS on my work computer, but again, I have to admit I don't use it very much because, I really just stick with using the reader and Zoom text for long, as you say, long documents. And it is quite nice to have the way I have it set up. It creates a little red box around each word, so I can kind I can sort of relax my eyes because I'm not having to really focus intensely on the screen. But it gives me an idea of where I am.
And do you both use a mouse on the computer?
Yeah,
I do.
Yeah,
I do use
I did, right, as well. And so learning the shortcuts for JAWS, I can never remember. Like, I was never fully taught the actual shortcuts to use JAWS, so I really struggle with that as well.
I do use a few shortcuts, but I still use the mouse probably more than I should do.
Yeah, I did right up till I couldn't see magnification. I was using the mouse, and I know all the basic like words, shortcuts and stuff, but the actual JAWS, how to make it read more effectively and stuff, I just simply can't remember how to do them.
I think with something like some of these technologies like JAWS, they offer a lot, but there's also quite a big learning curve to go up with them. I think I was offered a little bit of training on how to use it, but I think it could take quite a long time to really learn it.
And if you don't use it full time, then you're likely to forget it as well.
Exactly. I think I'd have to be forced to use it by.
We've got a question actually. I just looked at the comments.
Yes, we have. Yeah.
And somebody's asked, is it required for all people with Aniridia to know Braille? And I suppose we're talking about that a little bit at the moment.
Not really, no.
I wouldn't say it's required, but could it be helpful?
It's difficult, yeah.
Because
I'd say maybe just as a Braille teacher, with my Braille teacher head on, I would say like yes, just learn the alphabet maybe would be helpful, because then you've got the basics. You can use it if you need it for like reading things like tablet medications and stuff, and list numbers and things like that.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea actually, because I learned Braille just because of work really. I had to Braille some stuff and I needed to know what I was brailing, so I learned a bit of it. But now it does help with and you can keep practice up by just like reading lift buttons or the medicine bottles or the open and close buttons on trains and things like that.
Yeah, cleaning products also have the braille on.
But the best time to learn, I think, is usually when you're a child. But like for me, I'm heading towards 40, and I still have enough vision to, if it's magnified, to read some text. So although it's difficult, I can still do it. So whether or not that learning a skill when I was a child, would that really be useful for me? Well, maybe like in another 10 years or whatever, hopefully.
It's very individual.
Retain enough.
You don't know what's going to happen to you in your later life, because even just us three, so varied in vision loss journeys and stuff. So it's like all the associated conditions that you could have, and when they might develop, you just don't know, do you? So I think it's probably, I don't know, best to be prepared, but like you say, you might never need it. So
so maybe a little bit of braille would be useful, and then you've got a grounding in it if you need to take it any further.
And also the thing with braille is, of course, the harder it is to learn when you get older.
Yeah, I have learnt the alphabet myself as well, and I also started to learn a little bit more. I was quite lucky that a local braille teacher came and did a talk at the university when I was a student, and it was part of a language festival, and he was doing a talk on braille. And after the talk, he gave me an alphabet card from the RNIB, which has all the alphabet in braille on it. And then I sort of went to talk to him afterwards, and he said, "Oh, I'm doing a braille course, just the basics of braille at the local blind society." So I took advantage of that. That was a 6-week course, so I went and did that, and I was trying to teach myself more of it for a while. But then once I finished my PhD and started working, I didn't have so much time anymore, and I was trying to practice regularly, and then I haven't done much practice since, and I've started to forget it already. I have heard that the people who are the most proficient at reading it are the people that started learning when they were young and used it regularly throughout school and so on. But I definitely think it's worth learning the alphabet.
Yeah. Some of my students are quicker than me at reading braille, which is quite funny. But I don't tell them that, of course.
Question to Katie. Working for an engineering firm, she probably has to deal with a lot of graphics, diagrams, etc. How does she handle that with magnification? If so, how does she get the global picture, the general idea, when being able to view only a very small portion of the picture due to the very high magnification?
Well, that's definitely tricky. I do sometimes vary the magnification to just try to get a bit more of the wider picture, to put something into context, and then sort of zoom back in on the detail again. Yeah, for graphs and things, well, that's where the magnification is sort of really helpful in comparison to using a screen reader where you just wouldn't be able to capture that information. And I also have, for reading like physical books, I have I don't know, we call it a handheld CCTV. So it's got a camera and its own inbuilt screen, but it's smaller, so you can carry it in your bag, and you can get them in slightly different sizes. I have a relatively large one that I use at work, say reading physical books and documents, but it is small enough to put in a bag, and also I think it can also be used to take pictures of things like a whiteboard and then zoom in. So that sort of thing is useful, but there are situations where it is a little bit difficult to get around it. One thing I do find difficult is if I'm we're in a situation where someone records a video. Actually, I sort of do technical support for some engineering software, so I sometimes they record a video to show me what the problem is that they're having, but that's difficult to watch back because if I zoom out, I can't see the details, but if I zoom in and their mouse is moving around from different parts of the screen, I may sort of lose track of where the action is in the video. So I'm looking at the top corner and then the action's going on at the bottom corner, and by the time I figured that out, it's moved somewhere else as well. So that's the trickiest thing I find.
Yeah, we probably not at the same level, but at work we started using Skype to meet with people around the different parts of the country, and if they do a presentation or something like that, they'll share their screen, and I find that can be difficult sometimes because they'll be like showing you what's going on in the screen, but I have to zoom in to be able to see that, so it makes it difficult to follow.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we use Skype as well, and yeah, I do have that problem, which is a bit awkward actually because the people that I'm dealing with may never have actually met me in person, and they may not actually know that I'm visually impaired, and particularly when you're dealing with a customer, I'm always a little unsure as to whether to say I didn't see that, and I have to explain why because it may not be what they're expecting. There are usually ways around these things, or sometimes you can kind of get the information by asking a question, or I sometimes just go back and review things later. So sometimes it's just having to take a bit more time to kind of double check things. So what I was going to move on to, although we're almost out of time, but something we haven't really touched on is kind of having treatments or surgeries for various complications that can reduce your sight, like cornea issues and cataracts and glaucoma, and how you decide what surgery to have or when to have it, or if it's the right thing for you or not. I don't know if either of you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I've had a stem cell transplant and also cataract surgery, and particularly with the first one I had was a stem cell transplant, and it was only my left eye that was really affected at the time. So I wasn't really over concerned about like losing sight necessarily, although my left eye used to be my good eye, and then I had to shift. My world had to shift to the right because that had to become my good eye. But with the left eye, I wasn't worried about the sort of necessarily getting my vision back, but I got to a point where I had an ulcer that it took like 6 months and it just wouldn't heal, so I had the surgery. But it was a very involved, and it was affected my whole body, having to take anti-rejection drugs and things like that and steroids to keep it going. And it was hard work, but it has helped to stabilize that eye, and it's made it more comfortable. But I did get a bit more vision back, but then it went again because I had a cataract, and also because there's scarring on that eye that just means that it just won't be as good as it ever what it was. So it was a bit of a roller coaster of getting vision back and then not, and then having to have more surgery. And so with my right eye, it's made me more cautious about doing all those things. And it is a case of, this is the vision, if this eye goes, then that's the vision gone, really. So it's a difficult one, and I don't know, really. Just, yeah, you don't want to be on that roller coaster of getting sight and then having it taken away again. And I don't know if I'm making any sense at all now.
I think you are, or I can definitely empathise, because at one point I've been offered stem cell surgery and also a cornea transplant for my eyes, and I've also got slightly different opinions from different doctors. I mean, the same diagnosis, but slightly different opinions on how exactly they would treat it. But I have to admit that thinking about that sort of emotional roller coaster of, I don't really like the uncertainty of thinking, well, my sight might get better and then it might get worse again. And, in some ways I would prefer to have an eye condition that was more, it just stayed the same, because then at least I know what I was dealing with, and I didn't have to worry about things getting worse.
My experience is slightly different from both of yours, because I've had loads of operations, loads and loads and loads of operations, and the majority of those have been glaucoma related. And I never thought it was like, well, it was a choice. Of course I had a choice, but it was sort of, because the medication for glaucoma, the oral medication that you can have to control your pressures, Diamox, is really horrible. It gives you really bad side effects. And so it was a choice of staying on that long term. And I've only got one kidney, and it can be quite dangerous. Well, not dangerous, but it can be worrying to stay on that medication long term if you've got kidney issues. So it was a choice between staying on that medication or having operations for me. So it's slightly different in that respect. But then I did also have the choice of having a cataract operation, because I had a large central cataract in my right eye. And as I said earlier, I had a cataract in my left eye that was removed, and due to complications I lost the vision in my left eye, most of the vision in my left eye. So they didn't want to touch the cataract in my right eye for a long time, until I had actually lost the majority of vision in my right eye. And then basically it was about when I had it removed, my glaucoma specialist that did it, and it was at the point of shattering. So again, it was like the last minute option. So
yeah, I think that's the thing that gets me is having time to think about it almost.
That's what happened to me, because I just the pain of the ulcer for that long just was unbearable. And then they just said, okay, well, we've got an operation. You can have it in 3 weeks' time. And so I said, okay. And I didn't really have much time to really think it over very much. And I just
that's another thing with the glaucoma. The pressures that give bad pain as well. So that's another thing.
I went through sort of phases actually when my cornea first started to get really bad. It was really painful, or it went through cycles. Like it would be really painful for a couple of weeks, and then it would be okay again. And something Hannah said earlier about sort of deciding whether to get a long cane, and sort of when things are good, thinking, "Oh, I don't need to do that," and then when things are bad, thinking maybe I do, but not getting around to it. And I had the same sort of cycle with when my eyes are painful. I think, well, it's probably a good idea. Maybe it's worth, a little bit of a gamble to have an operation. At least if it would reduce the pain, that would be good for me. But then it would get better again, and then I'd be like, oh no, things are right. I can see okay. I'm managing fine, so I don't need to have it. And so I kind of went through that cycle many times. And actually now I get less pain than I used to, but I don't know if that's partly because I have changed my behavior in things like using more magnification on my computer and some of the things like that, or using my eyes a little bit less, or being a little bit more choosy about when I really push myself with my vision, and try not to push it too hard.
So I hate to interrupt, but I'm afraid the time is up. That was absolutely incredible. It was an amazing conversation. Thank you so much to all of you. Is there any sort of final words any of you want to make?
We've maybe talked about some difficult topics and said that things have been difficult for us at times. I think that overall, I think we're all still happy people, or we're positive about our life, and
absolutely,
definitely, And I often say I wouldn't want a cure if I was offered it.
And it's nice to have friends like you to see me through it all as well.
Yeah. When I first met other people with Aniridia, including Hannah and James, and then later Jenny, it filled a hole in my life that I hadn't even realised was there. Although finding out more about some of the complications of aniridia was a little bit scary, it's also been really reassuring to see other people who are maybe further along that journey than me and see how they've dealt with it. That's been really useful.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.